And then it's hosting and facilitating by me and then another tab intern called Maya. And let me introduce myself as well. Firstly, my name is Hao. I am the guest programmer of Migration Matters Festival 2022. And then, yeah, so let me kind of like kick it off by saying where this role come from and what is the program about, and then we can jump into the forum itself. Yeah, so we have this role in Migration Matters Festival since 2020. The time I was involved in Migration Matters Festival since I think it's 6 years ago. And I always participate as an artist to bring my work to the festival and showcase. And at one point, when the festival asked me if I got anything to bring up, and I was kind of like, well, partly because I wasn't make any work at that point, but also I was thinking about, is there any point or anything I can help to make this festival much more different per se. And I kind of realized it'll be good to have somebody or have a voice from different backgrounds of migrants background to step in, not just in artist lineup, but also in programming level or decision making level. So that's why I proposed this role to say, it'll be great to have this role. And then I'm really pleased that, the festival was really open-minded to it and in to be the first guest programmer. We were called a curator the year before, but I was for like a curator is quite heavy hat for this role, so I changed to the programmer. But anyway, that's another story. So, which means every year till now, it will have a small corner for me to program alongside the big umbrella of the festival program of any kind of like of topic I like or any kind of network I want to put it together. So I kind of choose different topics throughout the years, and this year we really focus on the topic of diaspora. And so we have like 6 events, including this one. And unfortunately, one of them canceled. Actually, happened supposed to happen today, but because the performers got sick. Yeah. So I mean, for me, this forum is really about to bring all the lovely people, amazing people, which I really, really want to work with, or I found their work very amazing and inspiring. They either have already do something with the festival already, or it just couldn't find it really a right scope for now. So I think this forum is really good to just bring us together and to hear a bit of their practices, and we can have a bit of conversation around the topic of diaspora, or even further. Yeah. So, but before everything, I'm gonna finish my bit and pass on to our fantastic co-facilitator, Maya. She is the tab intern. Jump in, join us this year. And yeah, so before that, I'm gonna read a bit of my statement of Migration Matters Festival's diaspora program this year. So yeah, let me find it out. Okay, the journey of diaspora, the program statement. When it comes to diaspora, I always have this image in my head, the image of this particular tree, Candelia obota, or we call 水笔仔 or water pencil in Taiwan. As a part of mangrove family, which grows in wetland, coastal sea line, or brackish water, the water pencil are salt-tolerant trees that are able to flourish in harsh conditions. What fascinates me about water pencil are the way they produce. Their seeds, which their name come from, sprouts and grow while still attached to the parent trees. When mature, they fall off and are transported great distance by waves. And the transportation can take months or even years until they finally land somewhere they can grow and hopefully one day flourish. So when I think about diaspora, the water pencil seeds come to my mind. I think about how they drift through violent storms, bright sunlight, underneath fleet of ships, surrounded by a school of fish. Some of them make it through, while many don't. Once they reach the place, they can rest, grow, and make it their home. I like to take this opportunity to frame, reflect, and reimagine diaspora as a way of living, a journey of drifting, or the guide of return. So yeah, that is my statement of it. And then I'm gonna pass to Maya to give us a little bit of the introduction. Also, by the way, before we jump in, at some point of this talk, we'll have the film sharing, and then that just be a trigger warning for everyone. It have the content of a sexual insult, for people might find it upsetting. So please feel free to turn away if that comes to you. So Maya, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Maya. So as Hal said, I'm a TAP intern and I'm currently a student at the University of Sheffield. And I'm delighted to be here, like co-facilitating this event with Evie and Shagufta, who are two inspiring women of colour who have dedicated their lives and to help communities and individuals flourish. I mean, for me, myself, in terms of my background, I would say I relate to, the Asian diaspora. I mean, I'm a second generation immigrant from the Black country near Birmingham. And both of my maternal and paternal grandparents emigrated to England in the late 1950s/60s from Punjab. And obviously, even now, like, I still see the evidence of the trauma caused by partition, of gendered violence from that time and even carrying on now, of caste discrimination, of colorism, and of class discrimination as well. And I think the way in which Evie and Shagufta, their work and their methods of processing trauma and of promoting healing, especially through their intersectional frameworks, are essential tools in terms of making our community as a whole more inclusive. And what particularly motivates me to be involved in this event is my admiration really for the two women running it. So Evie's like nature-focused approach to healing, and then obviously Shagufta's like powerful use of spoken word. And I think just in general, if you look at the title, so you could argue, like Hal said, it's like a tree. So it waters the roots of diaspora, it tends to its wounds, and it allows the flowers of the tree to blossom. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya, for this very touching beginning. So also there's a really brief about this event's structure to let everyone know. So now we're gonna pass mic to inspiring speaker, and then have a bit of conversation and question among us, and we'll open a conversation for everyone join this online. So yes, so I think it's gonna start with Evie. So you have the floor.
Hi everyone, my name's Evie Muir. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here in my capacity as founder of Peaks of Colour, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second and kind of delve into more detail as we go through the event. But I'm a descendant of Black Caribbean and by default, therefore African diaspora, born and raised originally in Doncaster, which for anyone who is local to South Yorkshire will know is the neighbouring town to Sheffield. So my experience of diaspora is often in relation to being a second generation person of colour, woman of colour, queer person of colour, in a very working class area of a very working class town, although now it's officially a city. I can't get used to that. So for me, it'll always be a town. And I moved to Sheffield 4 years ago after experiencing domestic violence. And that is where my work and activism really situates. I've worked in the gendered violence movement and the violence against women and girls sector for around 10 years now. And my work has always focused on the lived experiences of gendered and racialized trauma within Black and queer survivors' experiences. And on the back of that, I then, my work began to focus more on how to ensure that the support provided was embedded in anti-racism and LGBT inclusion. And I made the decision at the end of last year to actually leave the violence against women and girls sector, mainly because I lost hope in its ability to actually eradicate gendered violence. And that's a whole other rant for a whole other day, really. But I found that I was really burnt out working within my own trauma, within racist, institutionally racist and institutionally homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, you name it, and working environments. And I needed a break. And that break has soon materialized into something more permanent. And I've realized that the key to eradicating any form of violence is hope and imagination, and that is lost in the org sector because of all these abuses that's perpetrated within it. I was really fortunate to have built something, or have started building something that I hope can be that vehicle for hope and imagination, and that's Peaks of Colour. So we're a Peak District based Walking for Healing club, by and for people of colour only. We launched last year, so actually we're just about a year old, so we're still a baby. And at the time we were really born out of a recognition that we depend on nature so much, and that was made doubly clear during the pandemic, that we rely on that one walk a day. But for people of colour, accessing those spaces and something as simple as a walk isn't as straightforward. And we're really fortunate in Sheffield to have so much nature on our doorsteps. I think for the most part, the Peak District is no more than a 20-minute walk or drive away from any given point within the city. We have one of the largest areas of green space in the country, and yet people of colour within the city and around in areas aren't accessing that nature. And by default, that means we're not accessing nature therapy and the mental and physical well-being benefits that nature provides. So we launched last year. I was still working in the Vogue sector at the time. This was an additional project on the side, and I was really rigid when I would say that we are just a walking club, we are not doing any more. And that really came from a place of burnout. And since then, I've scrapped that idea, and we have capacity to do so much more, and there's potential to do so much more, specifically around the ways that people of colour heal from gendered and racialised trauma. So I won't go into too much more detail at this point, because I know the questions are going to draw out different things here and there. But yeah, that's a very brief overview of who I am and what Peaks of Colour is.
Thank you so much for your brilliant introduction, Evie. Yeah, so now I know we got lots. I mean, I got lots of questions. I want to know more about. Definitely, I'm sure the rest of the panels as well, and people who watch online as well. But let's hold it a little bit, and let's pass the mic to Skafta.
Hi, hello, thank you, Hal, and thank you, Evie. I'm I know we've been speaking a few times before today, but I've still got lots of questions and yeah, burning away to ask them. So yeah, really appreciate this opportunity to have that space to delve into those. So I'm Shukla Kekbal. I'm a poet, essentially. I'm really interested in storytelling. And I think especially growing up, as many of us will say the same thing, we didn't see our own stories reflected in literature. I went on to study literature at university, and the texts and the novels that we were studying at the time were sort of based in the subcontinent, which didn't always speak of the experience of South Asians living in the UK. You started to get a few books coming in, which was like one of the earliest, Brick Lane, of course, and you had Hanif Qureshi, but on the whole, quite an invisible community when it came to arts. And I really kind of wanted to go into that space of there are stories that exist. We are part of the mesh of the society, and there's interesting things that we can learn from and discover within different communities. And so poetry became my first love, and I published a short poetry collection here called Jam is for Girls, Girls Get Jam, which is the title of the first spoken word piece that I wrote for this collection. And from there, it just kind of grew. And I got to a point where I was often in the room as the only brown face in certain art spaces, in certain stage spaces, in organizations. And it was very lonely. And it made me realize that I know I'm not the only South Asian poet, and started reaching out to other poets, and started talking about this idea of how lonely it feels to be in these spaces on your own. And the more I spoke to other poets, we came to this decision that, well, actually, why don't we go into these spaces together? Similar to what Eve was saying about this idea of walking into the outdoor spaces, the art space was the same, that same kind of level of fear or injustice that you're facing sometimes as you step into that space. So I set up a project called the Yoniverse, which was aimed at platforming South Asian female poets. And it was great fun. We had a fabulous time. We ran events at Rich Mix, Golden Tongue Poetry Nights. We started getting open micers. More and more women came forward wanting to share their story, wanting to share poetry. And we ended up mentoring quite a few people who are now great poets. And the community and the buzz in that space was fantastic. I then relocated to Bristol, and I was still running the Yoniverse, but it got to a point where all the poets were getting really big and starting to publish their own books and doing their own tours. So we had to then put it on a bit of a back burner, which coincided with the same time as lockdown sort of coming into place. And that's the time when I started to then set up a project called Kyoto with my co-partner, Aisha Ali, who's absolutely phenomenal, a real powerhouse. And we set up Kyoto in Bristol. It's for artists of colour across the Southwest. And we don't just work with poets, it's very multidisciplinary. So we work with musicians, dancers, filmmakers, singers, comedians, any kind of theme of art you're working in. We really want to sort of draw people into creating a space, a platform that highlights people of colour artists, especially in the Southwest region where we felt there's very little representation. Great, and we know things are happening in London. There's other big cities that we know that there are those spaces, but we felt like in the Southwest it was quite difficult to see that representation. And again, the same conversations came out, this idea of being isolated and lonely. And from that, we decided rather than just host an event where we asked people to come up on stage, we then set up residencies where we encouraged different artists from different multidisciplinary backgrounds to work together and collaborate on a piece. Which was great because it's not something that we've done before, and getting a poet in with a dancer and a musician and just giving them a week or two to play with and just workshop each other and then say, okay, well what kind of story, what kind of end product came out of that. It was fascinating and it was also great to see a poet being forced to move in a different way on the stage, or someone who's so used to being backstage, no, I'm the musician, I just kind of hover around here, suddenly having to be pushed out of their boundaries. And it was really fascinating to see people work in that kind of community space. And Kyoto is still up and running and it's still going very strong. We've got a series of podcasts and hope that at some point people will be able to come down south and see what Kyoto are doing. We do have some stuff online as well. And then in my own capacity, I'm currently working on, I've just had a short story published with Comma Press, and I'm working on a poetry pamphlet, and I keep saying a novel, but it's taking a very long time to write the novel. So that's just a little bit about the kind of things that I've been up to and doing. Thank you.
Thank you, amazing. Also for your very brief introduction, not very brief, but very inspirational instruction. Yeah, I wonder if it is a point we should jump straight into the conversation, or is there anything we would like to show more?
I'm happy to jump straight into the conversation, because I've got loads of questions for you, and so I'm hoping that other people also have got lots of questions. That sounds good.
Yes. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. So yeah, let's open up a bit among us. Maybe, I mean, sorry, because I have an advantage to be a facilitator, so I'm gonna ask first question. Yeah, because just right alongside of you doing this kind of briefly talk about what you do, this kind of because I just have kind of a list of questions pre-write, but I think it just come up, I think is super relevant. Is this kind of like, because what I found fascinating to have this in the festival framework is to highlight things outside of the festival, as a thing, as happen regularly, as happen. Now, I mean, that's what I really hope, to bring this energy or momentum beyond the festival, to know what's happened on a regular basis or everyday life. So I guess my question is, because like Evie have the Pix color and Shikafta have the Kyoto, so that's the thing. Doesn't have like a really specific dance frame of happen every once per year. I think it happen really regularly. So I guess my question for you both is that how you keep or manage that this kind of things on a regular basis, or manage that momentum to keep things going on.
Oh, okay. Shikafta gave me the floor, so I'll go. My immediate answer is terribly. I manage it terribly. This is Peaks of Colour for me is, like I mentioned before, it's currently an add-on. And I currently volunteer as founder, as facilitator. We're still at the really early stages of just figuring out what we want to be, and for the most part that very much is about what my capacity is, and I think that's really important to kind of ground the future of a movement in, because essentially a whole collective that is about healing and recovery is going to be no use to anyone if the person leading it or facilitating it is burnt out as a result of doing so. So I'm I guess I'm at a point of kind of figuring out what's next. In fact, this entire year for me is exactly that. It's been about trial and error of putting the Vogue sector on pause, delving into Peaks of Colour a bit more and leaning into that more, but also, finding a way of paying the bills. So my entire, this year is about exploration of finding ways of doing gendered violence work in a way that feels safe for me, because for the most part of, I'd say at least 5 years or more, doing that work hasn't felt safe at all. And I'm hoping that Peaks of Colour can provide an avenue that feels right. But I'm really conscious that in order to create that space for me as a practitioner and as a worker, it's going to take time. It's not going to be sufficient for me to be like, right, I'm not going back into the sector, I'm going to get a huge pot of funding, we'll get charity status, X, Y, and Z, and we'll just run with it. I'm really conscious that that is one, diving into it so fast isn't healthy, and also those models aren't necessarily healthy. So I'm really trying to reject them for as long as possible. For example, the charity status, and kind of formalizing our structure in any way, and hoping that by remaining grassrooted, that creates a space of safety in and of itself. But in the meantime, it means balancing. It means negotiating. It means saying no to things that I otherwise probably would have liked to have said yes to. And it means, yeah, being really careful and conscious about what are yeses and what are nos and what are maybes and hopefully one days. I've had to be really strict with myself as well. So at the minute, up until this point, we've been doing 1 walk a month. And that has been, especially whilst I was working full time, that has been all I had capacity for. And even then, not really. Some months, not really. Some months it felt like a kind of a personal push to get out and go. And I always felt better afterwards, because that's what the Peak District does. That's what nature does. But some months it has been difficult to balance both full-time work and Peaks of Colour and writing and, you know, freelance work and everything on the side. And I think that really speaks to the amount of paid and unpaid labour that women of colour hold within our communities, our own personal lives, our relationships, our professional work, and how often our professional work is really linked into our own personal experiences as well. So it's been a balancing act that I think would be, I'd be lying if I said I got it right every time, because I haven't. Some months have been harder than others. Some months I have felt so rejuvenated by Peaks of Colour that I'm like, yes, this is it. This is what I'm going to commit to. And then the next month comes around and I'm like, I'm knackered. Maybe not. Maybe we need to rethink. So yeah, I think the honest response would be that some months and some days are easier and some days are harder than others. And it's and I think, well, my approach to it is that it would be unrealistic to hope for something that is perfect all the time. When we're doing community work, there is always going to be difficulties, and they could be many and varied, not least so that we're working within our own trauma. So I think to have that element of realism and to be able to have those personal and professional boundaries, and to be able to say, you know what, I need to do less and that's fine, when we need to, is part and parcel of it. So yeah, it's all a balancing act on my side. I don't know if you'd agree, Shasta.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I've been really lucky with the Kyoto project in that I have my man, I have Aisha, and Aisha and I have been working together, and I felt like setting things up on my own in the past has been quite tough and quite overwhelming, and having someone else there, so all my energy levels flag and they're on a high, then we get through this, makes a huge impact. But I totally echo everything Evie said, particularly around the work, the voluntary stuff you're doing. How do you pay the bills if you're constantly giving out as well? And these like I love doing this work, and you know, it's part of my community, it's part of it gives me something it allows me to thrive, but at the same time there has to be that balance. You're absolutely right. I do feel like from the point of view of Kyoto, something that I learned is, and Aisha's been able to hold that really well. I'm singing her praises lots, but we spent literally 3 weeks going through an Arts Council application form, and so I was like, oh my god, I love you for making sense of this for me. So we do rely on funding where we can, because we feel like our work does need to be paid for. I have children, I have bills to pay, so I have to prioritize that as well. Working with Aisha, I think, allows you to understand how much if you're working for a community, the community is part of the process. And I think what we realize from Kyoto is that Kyoto is its community, and the audience, the residency artists, the headliners that we have who come and are part of the show, make it what it is. They bring their own energy into that space, and when you're in that space in that moment, you're like, oh, it's all worth it. It was really worth it, despite all the stress and all the anguish the days beforehand that we went through. In that moment, you realize how special it is to be part of, and how privileged I am to be part of that space. So yes, the energy, you're right, it comes in ebbs and flows, but it's being part of that community, it's really valuable, and it's priceless. Yeah, it's priceless. It's definitely gives you this sense of it's wholeness. I don't know if you feel that, Evie.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, there's a sweet spot, I think, in, I don't know, maybe kind of 20 minutes into the walk, where kind of you're not waiting around for people, you're not worrying that no one's going to show up. Everyone's here and accounted for, and everyone's got water, and you can set off on that walk, and there's a moment where you just breathe, and kind of everyone's chatting away, and you kind of can just either look back at the group and be like, oh, this is why I'm doing it. This is why we're here. And why was I even stressing in the first place? Like, you know, all of that. And then, I mean, the reason I created Peaks of Colour was because I relied on the Peak District so much for my own trauma recovery. And yet despite that, I've never felt the same amount of rejuvenation and kind of healing and joy on my own as I do at the end of a Peaks of Colour walk. There's something different, and that is quite literally community and community only. That's nothing to do with me, and that's nothing to do with the Peak District. The difference is that you're in the Peak District with your community, and that's really special. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that was very lovely. Yeah, I mean that's really answered everything I'm kind of curious. So thank you so much. Yeah, really open up the question. So does anyone see another question for anyone else?
I might take this opportunity, if there's no questions at the moment, to talk a little bit about some of the work that I wanted to share in this space. I know how you've done a trigger warning and have let audiences know that there are themes around violence and assault. So if anybody did want to step away at this point or switch off, you're more than welcome to do so. The film isn't more than 6 minutes, so you could always come back in 10 and rejoin the group if you wanted to. But just listening to the things that Evie was speaking about in terms of nature, the world, and trauma, and just the kind of systematic abuse as well. This is a film that I wrote for and produced with a director called Elizabeth Misen, and I was studying in my 20s and learnt about the horrendous abuse that South Asian women face when coming into the UK at the border at Heathrow. Whenever I go to Heathrow, I go with my passport in hand, all excited about going on holiday, and maybe kind of like, oh yeah, I'll get stopped and ask questions. That's kind of the extent of it. But there's some research that shed light on how South Asian women particularly were being targeted by the Home Office as they came into the UK, about their on the basis of their immigration status, but it was just a direct violation of women's bodies. And it's something that I then went away, and it really bothered me. I tried to speak to the elders in my community, and they didn't want to talk about it. And it made me think that if women in our community, particularly that generation, have faced abuse from the system, then how will the future generations or their daughters or they themselves then go back to that same system and ask for help? And that just kind of goes back to what you were saying, Evie, because you're asking for help from somewhere where you're facing racism, you're facing Islamophobia, you're facing all these other microaggressions and discriminations. So it's a very long-winded way of explaining and introducing this short film. I wrote a poem about it, and then I thought it's not going to communicate my thoughts on it enough. And then I came to the realization that I really liked Elizabeth Meisen as a director, and I felt she would have sensitively held the space to make this film. And so I'd like to share the poetry film Borders, if that's okay, Hal.
Ten-hour flight smothers my skin. The feel of his latex gloves as he opens me to the cold table reminds me that unlike birds, I have not migrated with the freedom of wings, but like a woman, I have come bearing honor on my shoulders, bound by borders. Body pressed to coldness, I lie here. I stare at the ceiling, and the cold grips me, holds me down, pierces through me, held open, my legs flopped, goose pimple exposed, V-shaped vulnerability. The stinging smell of lubricant, I await speculum, that tight pinch to graze dignity from me. A voice speaks. Relax by taking slow, deep breaths. It may hurt more if you are tense. A light snakes round and peers into me, all my secrets snatched. And instead, I think my poor mother's familiar hands, tearing coriander into my life. The flavors that colored our world, bay leaves, jeera, haldi, saffron, march, fenugreek, open book. I am the recipe shared by my mother. We carry them with us everywhere we go. I am the memories of cinnamon and cardamom, and I think my sense of history. I hold on to it. How the untold history of my people would manifest in my mother's cooking pot, her obsession with pickles, mangoes, limes. Sunbeams would spill out into our evening meals. Speculum, the cold burns through me, opened, layer, layer, layer. Nothing more than my flesh scraped. I feel only my skin, my heart, outside my body, my heart, my tongue, heavy, no words, my heart on my head, blurs, cold beads swept my neck, red rush, my heart, no words, my skull, heavy as chalk, no words, my heart, I try not to crumble. Shame hovers in the room with us. I glow back membrane of darkness. Hymen found. Status confirmed. It is over. But I remain open. Humiliated. As I pull my shalwar over my numb legs, face wet, holding pain into me, I watch the ground. And think instead my mother, unaware in her Jilani, simmering in her pot, spices that explode into the night air, smoke from the fire tumbling into the evening sky, ready to infuse the clouds. I think of my mother.
It's quite an intense one, so I think it might be good to let people just come back.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm gonna say. It was really intense, but really painfully truthful. And I mean, it's something where it's not often been written into the textbook or histories, and this side of the history, but we're moving forward as a whole as a whole group, as a whole society, where sorry, I kind of lose my word for a bit, but it's like it is definitely something we cannot forget about. And I really appreciate why through this film you made and the poem you wrote, we feel the power of it. And huge appreciation for you to bring it back to us.
Thank you. It was really difficult to even write about it, and I kept questioning myself about filming it because I thought in some ways it's not my story to tell, but in other ways it is my story to tell, because there is an untold, unspoken trauma that's probably been passed down. And I think particularly what's been happening in recent weeks with what's happening with the refugees and asylum seekers who are claiming status in the UK, it just made me feel like this will be a good place to actually bring that conversation back to the forefront, because the way in which people of colour's bodies are being treated by this state is appalling. And you get to a state where you think, okay, it's better. They're not doing virginity tests anymore on South Asian women. You find out that actually this has gone 5 steps back again, and we're now sending vulnerable people to into the middle of Rwanda now. So for me it's really heartbreaking to see the kind of constant going back into that state and regressing, and we need to keep speaking about it, and we need to keep raising awareness. And I admire everybody who's gone out, campaigned, or tried to stop these deportations. I think yesterday was National Windrush Day as well. So thinking about the communities in this country who've been exploited by and left to really diabolical situations that they've had to deal with. I kind of feel it's important for us to talk about, even though it's traumatic, and even though it's really hard and it's difficult, and it's a Debbie Downer on the pie. And I'm always like, I'm sharing this thing, and I think, oh no, I've upset everybody, and now nobody knows what to say. But we need to talk about it. We need to remember it, because hopefully it inspires action. And I think that's what Evie was talking about, this idea that, okay, if that system's not working, what can we do that's going to work for us? How can we reclaim that power? So I think that film for me hopefully is part of that process.
Thank you, though. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to say anything about Maya? Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to ask Shakofta about how people usually receive that film. because obviously, especially in the South Asian community, anything like that is very taboo. And anything, especially with women's bodies, in terms of women in color, is taboo. And so again, like obviously Evie like can answer this as well. Like, how do you combat that sort of, that sort of, we don't speak about it, that sort of but denial, really?
I think maybe that's why I was really nervous. And then it made me realise that the Home Office deliberately targeted South Asian women and South Asian communities for this very specific reason, in that they will not talk about what they're experiencing. So it's been shared in a few film festivals. It's won a few awards as well. It's been shared in India. And it's not a big film. It's not had a massive audience, but it's been shared at a few film festivals. And I think for me, I did have somebody once reach out and say thank you for shedding light on this experience. I've never heard anyone speak about it. I didn't realize that it happened to more than one person. And I think for me, all the other things that happened with this film in terms of it touring or doing well successfully, that moment of hearing somebody reach out and say, thank you for making this film and speaking about this issue, which is close to my heart, that was really powerful. And I felt, okay, I did the right thing for at least one person, and really glad that I followed it through so I think it's that's the kind of reception I've had. But it's not like a massive movie, and it's not like been in lots of different spaces, but the spaces it has been in, I think people have acknowledged it and are in some ways thankful that it's been dealt with I hope I've dealt with it sensitively, and that people feel that it has been dealt with in that way.
I guess on the back of that, and yeah, I mean, firstly, I want to say thanks to Shagufta, because it's a hugely important issue to be platforming, and we know that so many people will have benefited from its existence. I think kind of in relation to the question on things being taboo and how we break that, I think the answer lies in safety. And safety can be manufactured and built in various different ways. Sometimes safety looks like you and your experiences through the creative lens of a poem and a film. Sometimes safety looks like a physical space. Sometimes safety looks like a one-on-one conversation with someone you trust. Safety is kind of underpins all of the ways that we can communicate an issue that we've experienced, or a wrong that's been done to us, or a harm that we're living with. And it's about creating those spaces of safety as much as possible. And especially because, when people, especially with anything to do with gendered violence, the first thing people say, even now, is, why didn't they report it? And here you are, this, I think Shagufta's work is a prime example of that we can see full circle. You've got communities of women who were subjected to violence by the state. So why would then those communities go to the state for support, or go to any form of institution for support, especially when that violence is being regurgitated now? I mean, even in the domestic abuse bill, there's no support for migrant women who are experiencing abuse, and that's because the state is the abuser. Essentially, it's the big one. There may be individual abusers within interpersonal relationships as well, but it's the recognition that actually we can't break taboos in a conventional societal sense, because we don't just have one abuser. I'd go as far as to say that anyone who is existing as a marginalised person or a marginalised community, we all have an abuser, and that is the state. And then on top of that is all our individual lived experiences and interpersonal lived experiences. And actually, what is the solution to that? Well, I think community and creativity is one of them, because both of those have been the bedrock for activism and revolution, and you think of kind of protest posters, and it's all rooted in art, and it's rooted in self-expression, and it's rooted in community, and that's all the things that the government can't stand, and that they're trying to suppress, and that they're trying to defund and segregate, and they're so scared of art and community. They really are. The government is terrified of us, and this is why, because we're, I guess, collectively encouraging, we're encouraging community, and that's scary to the people at the top. So yeah, I got all of that from Shagufta's video. So
I
thank
take
you.
what you're saying, and I want to continue talking to you about this, because I feel like artists, and I think grassroots organizations, are almost holding up a mirror to society, and that is the fear, because when you hold a mirror up to ugly truths, that's what scares the government. They don't want to address those things, and I feel like that's what art does. It says we are witnessing this in the world. This is what's happening around us, and whether it's through music or dance or poetry or song, this is how it reflects. So I jumped in on you, Evie, because I was like, yes, I'm feeling everything you're saying about this. Yes, it puts a fear in those who don't want to hear that challenge or be questioned.
Hugely. And even, I've found it with, because we call ourselves a buy-in for organisation or collective, and that's exactly what we are. And I think buy-in for is a scary term for people, because just by the fact that we exist, or that we have to exist, or feel we have to exist, it is that mirror of saying, well, we're existing as just us because what's out there and what you're doing and what currently exists isn't safe and isn't right and is harmful. And it requires people to ask the question, well, why not? Or the people who it's excluding, and people of colour, it is whiteness. So why not invite white people in? I was like, well, do you want us to actually answer that? Because, and the reality is that people don't want us to answer that. People are offended and and angry, and we've had some resistance by those who really aren't allies, because we are that mirror. If we exist, it means that what currently existed isn't okay. You can't hide behind that illusion that Peak District is, or even beyond that. People say that there's no racism in the outdoors, that the outdoors is for everyone. Well, it's not, is it? And if we're not the only one, Peaks of Colour is not the only buy-in for outdoors group out there, and that is a really harsh reality for those who benefit from whiteness to accept. We are that mirror, and it's an uncomfortable one.
And you're right, because in Bristol we've got Stepping Sisters, similar work, where it is about taking women of colour into the outdoor spaces. And my mum goes quite regularly, and it's fascinating because she's lived in the west part of the country for her whole life, and there's places she's never visited because she's not felt comfortable. If she wore shalwar kameez, she wouldn't want to go into those spaces for being stared at and being the only one, or just kind of the racism you would experience, especially in rural settings and areas. So we need spaces like Stepping Sisters and Peaks of Colour, because I feel like it's empowering. And yet we come from, so I'm also Punjabi, and we come from very outdoors kind of community. We're farmers. So to go from a very farming outdoors background where you spend most of your time outside, to coming to and migrating to this country and then spending your whole time cooped up, afraid to go outside of certain boundaries and spaces, is it's just heartbreaking. So I'm so pleased that there are spaces like Peaks of Colour and Stepping Sisters, because you're right, nature is healing. It's healing,
as is creativity. I think the two I'm really interested in the two, and merging the two, because I think anything that offers a space of healing is that huge middle finger to everyone, to our individual abusers, to the state as an abuser. It's all anything that allows us to turn around and say, you know what, I'm okay today. Well, then they've lost, haven't they? At least on a day-to-day basis, they're losing. So yeah.
And I actually run retreats and residencies for people to go away and do writing, and I always include walking, because I feel like the amount of creativity that comes from the walking process is it's very powerful. I ran a workshop yesterday and it's about journeys, but it's this idea of how walking, that idea of moving forward physically in your body, allows you to move forward in your mind, and how walking is an act of being like the sacred. So as I was speaking about the fact that in a month's time, less than a month, it's the Muslim celebration of Hajj, where Muslims go on a pilgrimage and walk around the Kaaba and between the two mountains, Safa and Marwa. But I've also got friends who go to the south of Spain, where you've got walking pilgrimage, sort of treks going right down through the mountains. I think as human beings, we are just intrinsically linked to this idea of moving forward, and it does. I think it just allows our mind to, whenever I'm about to write, I'll go for a walk, because I know that's going to be more helpful than sitting around researching on Google and going down a rabbit hole of silly videos. It's is going to bring that creativity and open your eyes up to what's happening in the world around you. So I do feel like they're completely linked, and so I absolutely love what you're doing.
And likewise, back at you.
Thank you. I mean, that was really, really interesting back and forth conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I actually taken lots of notes. And I think maybe it's about the time we can open up a bit of the conversation to whoever participate. Would be great. And before we jump into that, I also like to share a bit of like my resignation of, I don't know, the frustration of repetition, this kind of a dark side of the history. For a little bit, because I don't know if you guys remembered, I think just a year ago or 2 years ago, there's a case happened in a Raleigh and Dover, where like a 10-ish sort of like Asian found a suffocating death in a Raleigh track, and then the first thought it was Chinese, but it turned out it was Vietnamese. Around the time I was about to, I was reading this book called Chinese Whisper. It's written by this author called Bai Xiaohong. It's to do this undercover kind of like journalist undercover to record this undocumented Chinese labor in Chinatowns, in factories, in up and down the country. And it was up in 2000. And at the intro, she says the reason why she want to start to work on this book is because there's a news happened, I think around 90s, the similar story, right? There's the Rory, people found track in the Rory, and some of them died, some of them extremely terrified, and then that was 2008, and I was reading this book at 2020, and then at that point, I was just like, I found the frustration and the impact on me so much, because at that time I was meant to have this as my bedtime reading. I gotta go to sleep, but I couldn't, because that just so I just can't get away with the thought of like, why the similar things happen over and over again and again, and then people suffering and people dying over and over again. And how can we allow this to continuously happen? And yeah, that kind of frustration was taken on me on that night, which I actually stayed up pretty late at night. So yeah, I mean that's why we have this talk, and that's why I really, really appreciate what we're doing. The practices you're doing is a way to reflect in that, as a way of like really grassroots basis to kind of to reflect that kind of like a bit of history been ignored. And I truly believe that of the things you did, and it is a really kind of an initiative to this starting point to acknowledge that. And I hope pull this all together on this talk and this festival. I mean, of course, things happen way beyond, a lot more beyond the festival framework, but I hope it really is a point to start for everyone more curious and to engage and to understand or to have a conversation. And that for me is truly important. So yeah, let's open up for a little bit for those who join us, listen to us along the way. And or if you listen to on YouTube or any other social media interface, feel free to fit in questions for any of us. Yeah. I know it's going to take time, so maybe I also can start a little bit of from me to ask a question. I mean, I have that thought while you start to do a bit of intro, and then I found this kind of like really strong connection, or perhaps a bit like a motivation, is that sense of isolation and loneliness. And yeah, I mean, obviously it work on different contexts, and therefore they come up with a different practice. But I wonder how that being addressed or take care, or does that change through your practice? I mean, the main loneliness and isolation, it was, it also been in different sort of like theme as well, like isolation through COVID, or a loneliness where, because I kind of feel usually after sometimes when I go to the certain art festival, I'm the only one who like Asia based. So yeah, I mean, this question really opened up for you both.
Yeah, I suppose I feel like I little bit answered it through talking about things like having places like Kyoto set up, where, or even the Peaks of Colour, where you are able to do things collaboratively, because it is very difficult. And I think arts in general is quite a lonely, isolating career path. I mean, if you're going to be a writer, you sit at home at your desk and you write all day, and you don't interact with real human beings, only the ones in your imagination. So it's quite tough and quite lonely work. But I do feel like there are lots of arts organisations that bring people together, and I feel like that it comes back to the sense of community, which I think Evie and I were speaking about. I think community changes so much, and it does give you hope, and it gives you joy, gives you a break, and gets your brain kind of thinking. So I think for me, I love the act of walking. I think that's really important for my process of writing, but community feeds into my writing 100%, because it is experience. It's about talking out your thoughts, and oftentimes, like you said, you walk into a space, Helen, you are the only brown face, you're the only Asian face in that space, and having that support, having that community where you walk in and like, we're here together, we've got this, and we acknowledge and understand each other's experiences to some extent. So I do love performing to particular audiences, especially like if it's really diverse. I don't feel like when I'm on stage I've got to explain everything. Sometimes I'll say something and the word will just land, and everybody in the audience gets it. They know, because they know that they've all been there, experienced it in their own communities in some shape or form. And then it allows me as a writer, as an artist, to be able to move forward with my work, because I'm not just sat there explaining everything. I'm able to push the boundary a bit more. I don't know if that's answered your question, or if I've gone up in a really weird loop. I've got a bit of weird, but yeah, that's kind of my immediate gut response.
Yeah, I very much second. I think my first immediate gut response was also community. I thank you, Shagufta, for going first, because it's given me a bit of a chance to have a deeper think about it. And I find the concept of isolation really interesting, because it is fundamentally a tool for abuse. Like, relating it back to gendered violence, the first thing an abuser will do is isolate that person from their support systems and their sources of help, and the people who can call out their behaviour and X, Y, and Z. So when we think of isolation and, well, who is making us feel isolated, then really that's very easily traced back to an act of violence or an act of harm. And I think to think of being isolated in white spaces in that way is really important. That if we're the only Black or brown face in a room and we feel isolated, then that is an act of harm. So for me, it's calling that out. And I do, and maybe I do too bluntly or whatever, but I do. And have over the years really learned to one, call it out, and to one, not stay in that space. It will probably have to take a lot of money for me to stay in a space that feels that wrong. And I think we can all relate to that feeling of just being like, wow, this isn't for me, this clearly isn't for me, and I'm going to go now. And it also made me think of, I mean, yes, community, but I think we talk about community a lot without necessarily naming what it is and what it can look like. And it can come in so many different forms. It can come in a walking club that's, you know, predominantly a group of strangers or acquaintances coming together, and we all look the same and we all are like-minded and we all have similar lived experiences, and we're coming together to share that. It can also look like the people that we've grown up with and the people that we share as family. It can also look like a group of people specifically coming together for one reason. And for the most part, I've had to contend with different views on all of that. And there's I think I really pushed myself to find community that was only like-minded, and that felt really safe. But it was interesting, I was writing an article on burnout recently, and I interviewed a psychotherapist called Dwight Turner. He's a Black psychotherapist whose work around trauma focuses on othering. And I'm going to paraphrase because I'll never be able to quote it so eloquently, but he was essentially saying that it's so important to have a community outside of our activist spheres as well, because living within our trauma, working within our trauma, that is when burnout rises its ugly head, essentially. And he used his 2-year-old daughter as an example of someone who gives him that escapism, who just wants to talk about, you know, whatever programs they're watching, and plays with him, and just is that sense of escapism. And actually maybe having a community that isn't part of the activist community, that you know, are the people that you go and watch films with, or I don't know, you go to a dance class with, or you just sit and watch reality TV with, they are equally as important and equally as a valuable source of community and a remedy for isolation, and the community that makes you feel overtly seen and recognised. And I'd never thought of it before, so I've spent many years kind of running from people who don't get what racism is, and, you know, all those things. And there's a real fine line actually of where that safety lies, of, you know, do we need to just have a community of people who is an echo chamber essentially, or is there value in a community outside of that too? And ultimately, if the end goal is that we don't feel isolated, and we haven't isolated ourselves from either camp, then that can't be a bad thing. But yeah, I found it very interesting, a different perspective on that kind of thing.
Thank you for both of your answer. Yeah, that was really it's really interesting to hear you address that indifferently, and then I find it really, I mean, I learned a lot too through your perspective, where I never really thought of before. But I think we have actually got a question from our listener. Yeah, I mean, Maya, do you want to give it a read through? Yeah, you're mute.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to read it out for you?
Yes, please, if that's okay.
So they said, thank you for telling me about your experience. I'm an asylum seeker who lives now in the UK, and I like writing fiction. what advice could you give to me and other new authors who want to be seen and be published?
Oh, awesome. I love that. I just ran a workshop yesterday with Spread the Word, which is an organisation that do workshops, particularly in London, for people who are new to writing. So it's always good to look out for communities, as we said, but writers groups and organisations who promote that. So places like Apples and Snakes will be a really good organisation to go to, who run workshops, or they'll tell you where you can find further information. And usually if there's a festival on in your local area, literature festival, they will have workshops where you can attend for free possibly, or at a reduced rate. But I do feel like belonging to a community is the first part of then being able to share your work with an audience and have peer reviews and grow your writing. So it sounds really exciting that you're pursuing this. And I hope you're writing also bilingually in other languages. So somebody who attended the workshop yesterday, though it was facilitated in English, they wrote in their own, they wrote in Urdu, which was great. So I would recommend just keeping an eye out on your local libraries in case they're running anything, literature festivals. And then in London, if you're London based, it's organisations like Spread the Word, Apples and Snakes, but there will be things locally to Sheffield as well. So I know you've got a literature festival in Sheffield, and Leeds is having one at the moment. There's and that's a great festival. I know it's very quite cutting edge.
Yeah, we've got Off the Shelf Festival. I think that's our main one, but we also have a lot of huge writing communities. If Sheffield is where you're based, Peaks of Colour actually, in collab with Migration Matters, hosted a nature writing workshop last Saturday, and that was our second one. So the facilitator of that was called Dal Kalar. So I couldn't recommend her enough. She is a nature writer and facilitator, and outside of Peaks of Colour, she does loads on this kind of thing. So I definitely check her out. In terms of being seen and published, we're kind of in the same camp because I'm also trying to navigate the publishing world as a marginalised woman, and I think my most honest answer would be to it's not easy, and to have realistic and even maybe low expectations of the industry, not of yourself, quite the opposite, but of the industry. I think it's fair to say that the industry is white male led, and that really puts us as marginalised writers at a disadvantage. So to counter that requires support and requires community, and and that's how I've been able to navigate it in a way that's felt safe. It's not to say that I haven't had very unsafe interactions with particularly white men in the publishing industry. I have, but those communities have really held me in those times. There is a Black Writers Network that's national, and they offer mentorship, which I accessed, for example, and I'm pretty sure there are very similar mentorship schemes around the country. And also I think it's something I found really helpful is getting an agent, because all the kind of icky stuff, as I call it, of, the technicalities of it, I don't understand the world of publishing, and I'm not interested in understanding all the technicalities of it, really. And having an agent takes a lot of that pressure off. It means I don't have to be the person contacting people. It means, they can do kind of the admin-y stuff almost. And I'd really recommend the Good Literary Agency for that. They only take on writers from marginalised backgrounds. And the founder is Nikesh Shukla, who wrote The Good Immigrant. And that's felt like a really safe place for me to kind of dip my toe into that world and who knows what comes out of it. I think that's a really good attitude to have with it, because it's very hard to kind of, it's hard to navigate. It really is. So just having that support. I've just seen the additional question on how to find an agent. For me, it was trial and error. I did a lot of Googling. I had a look at books that I liked, and then kind of traced it backwards in terms of these are books that I like that might be similar to mine or in the same ballpark. These are the authors I like. These are who represented them. And equally on the opposite side, looking at kind of books that I didn't like and who represented them, and maybe they're not going to be right. You know, I don't know if it's a book on white feminism and transphobia or something. Well, maybe I don't want to be with an agent who promoted that book and supported it. But fundamentally, it was a lot of kind of social media and word of mouth, and speaking to people who had experience in that and saying, oh, this person might be a right fit, this person might not be. And ultimately, I popped them an email through. There was 2 people actually who made my shortlist, so to speak, I guess. And I just sent them an email and introduced myself and said, this is what I'm hoping to write. This is my experience so far. And then, had conversations with them both. And ultimately, I chose the Good Literary Agency because the kind of values and ethos of it is very much more in the activist camp than in the corporate world, and that felt right for me. So I wouldn't make a rushed decision on it. I think, these are your words and these are your lived experiences, and it's really important that they're in safe hands. So my advice would be not to rush and to just explore and have conversations, and, you know, keep people in the back of your mind. And manage expectations, because there's nothing worse than getting your hopes chat on, so to speak, by a white man in publishing. That's not what any of us want. So I don't know if that's helpful.
That's really helpful, actually, and you're absolutely right, Evie. And I would also second and say, look at small publishers. I think there's a lot more humanity there. And like Evie said, look at authors who you like, and then see who's their agent, who they've been published with, where have they been published before. I know the Good Literary Agency also have a small journal that they print, I think 4 times a year. You can submit to that. So if you haven't got a bigger piece of text, you've got a short story, or they do call outs. There's also a magazine called Gidder Magazine, which is KHIDR. They also do call outs. And there's a couple more who, if you're interested in writing, whether it's poetry or short fiction, you can keep an eye out and see who's doing a call out and submit something to them. And that kind of grows your profile, so then when you go to an agent or you go to an agency, you can say, I've been selected to be part of this magazine, or I've got a bit of a history in it. But totally back what Evie's saying in terms of, I wouldn't go, I mean, I personally wouldn't go knocking on the door of Faber and Faber or whatever it is, but the Burning Eye Books, for example, and then in London, in Birmingham, you've got Verve Publishing. Verve Publishing have a literature festival, so you can go and perform and you can go and read at their festival. So it kind of puts you on their radar. It's just about sort of kind of going, hi, hello, I'm here, and submitting things and then hoping for the best, and being a bit thick-skinned and getting knocked back quite often, which a lot of us as writers have to experience. It's good for the soul, apparently. It toughens you up.
I mean, I kind of also like to bring this question on the bigger scope. Like, for example, in a theatre or performance in world where, because my experience is I have work and I try to partner with a producer, and I would really ideally try to find an East Asian producer. It's really, really hard to find one, you know. And then and even those who I able to find, they're based in London. I think that's what a really interesting question is. Like, we need more people working in, arts and culture sector, particularly, it's not only those who are the most visible. We need people working as a producer, we need people working as a stage crew, lighting designer, all this kind of stuff. And because that will be really, really helpful to, I mean, I don't know, I kind of actively looking for that because there's the subject matter, also because they are, we kind of more understand like we understand each other's struggle, and then we can start from there. So yeah, I think that's also, it kind of brought up this kind of like infrastructural issues. Yeah, and just my small comment and encourage everyone, please participate. And yeah, I think we might have a scope for a last bit of question if anyone wants to step in and ask. I mean, also among the panelists as well.
The last question is a scary one, isn't it? So let's let people.
Maya, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, if no one else had a question, I have a question, but I don't mind.
Yes, go for it.
I was going to ask, like, have you had any like difficulties, especially like in your work, in terms of like allyship and stuff like that? Because obviously that is, you know, I would see that's where you would get the most difficulties, especially because obviously experiences and lived trauma, they convey real feelings, and it's very hard to get other people to really feel those feelings and to really understand them and comprehend them, I would say.
Big yes from me. Yeah, we've Peaks of Colour has had and does get some backlash from some white people, and that's it, full stop. That is it. When we first launched, especially, and I think this speaks to kind of the wider landscape of racism that we're all existing in, because when we first launched, I shared the information about us on across as many Peak District related, outdoors related kind of Facebook groups as I could find. And these Facebook groups have thousands and thousands of members in them. And in every single one, I think there's probably about 18 or so, in every single one, we were faced with racism in, you know, across the spectrum of really overt racism to the microaggressions to, well, outdoors isn't racist, you know, we had the whole spectrum of it. And that was dealt with in a variety of ways from the admin of the group. I'll say that only the Sheffield Outdoor Plungers group had admin that were equipped to deal with it, that checked in with us regularly on our own well-being, and that had a protocol on dealing with that kind of behaviour in their spaces. All the others didn't. And, you know, we've all experienced online abuse in one way or another. We've all got tough skins with it in one way or another. I think what it speaks to is these are the people that like the outdoors enough to be part of a Facebook group or part of multiple Facebook groups. So these are the people that we may or may not be encountering actually outside in the wild, so to speak. So it means that we don't know who we're passing at a kissing gate or in a car park, or if we're going to get lost and be able to approach the next person we see for advice and support, because maybe that person is on that Facebook group and was one of the people who commented. Maybe that person is one of the people who took to Mam Tour in 2020 with a massive White Lives Matters banner and stood at one of the most popular Peak District locations, and branded it and hid their faces. Maybe that's them. Maybe it's them who then took that banner to Ben Nevis and did the exact same thing a few weeks later. So I think the fact that we haven't had support it just speaks to the fact that this is exactly why we exist and why we're needed. And, you know, on the flip side, we have had huge support from allies. There's currently someone who's making a website for Peaks of Colour that should cost about £3,000 as we speak. You know, there's allies that have supported us in so many ways, whether that's through emotional support, financial support, practical support, whether it's introducing us to contacts, whether it's providing us with kit to give out, there's a fantastic guy who runs a outdoors activity centre in Matlock, and he's providing training for all our volunteers for free. You know, the allyship is there, and there's a deep recognition that the allyship is needed. And I think that recognition comes off the back of a recognition that there is a lot of discrimination and violence and harm being perpetrated in these spaces at the same time. And, you know, I think it's safe to say that probably the allyship doesn't outweigh the harm at this point, and that's really important, because the harm is on the back of decades of harm that we've all been collectively experiencing, and that are, you know, it's intergenerational. So actually, you know, someone posting something on Facebook will have a longer lasting effect than someone doing a kindness. And I think that's really important. Like, the kindness and the allyship needs to outweigh the harm. Otherwise, it's not enough, and it isn't enough to override trauma, and it isn't enough for us to turn around and say, oh great, we don't need to exist anymore because the allies are out there. So yeah, we do need allies, and allies do exist. But I think the biggest way allies can support us is by doing that work in their own communities. I mean, a £3,000 website is also great, but on the back of that, you know, why allyship needs to come from within, because if you are sat next to someone, if you're sat next to someone who's being racist, who's saying something racist, who has the power to act on that racism, and your only act is to go to us behind the scenes and try and, you know, and be kind, that's not enough. It needs to be called out. It needs to be reported, and yeah, it needs to be addressed within those communities. So that's where the allyship is most. It makes me think of Anita Sethi's book, I Belong Here, because I don't know if anyone's read it, but she experienced racial abuse on a train in the Peak District. And it was a full train. She was the only person of colour on the train, and no one did anything. And it's exactly that. It's a great example of, you know, allyship is all very well and good behind the scenes when someone's emailing you, offering you a donation or something, but actually the trauma comes from being in a space where the allyship isn't present in real life. So yeah, I hope that's answered your question. I went on a rant.
Is anyone anything? No? Is anyone want to add anything? No? Okay. Good. So I would like to closing. I thought it's really funny because there's light coming to the window. The light comes to this window and it reflects into my face. There's a kind of really weird kind of light setting. So hopefully I'm not you know, purposely doing this. So but yeah, it looks quite amazing. But I'm quite burned. So yeah, I'd like to close this or conclude this forum with, if that's okay with everyone, to conclude this forum with actually a short word I wrote not long ago, actually, this year when I joined this panel talking about working with migrant artists in the UK, actually in Bristol. And I like to put it up and read it through with you guys, and as a kind of like a final, you know, statement, and if that's all good. So that's a letter to those who engage with migrant artists or arts and culture sector workers in all kinds of ways. Don't assume people will understand what you understand. Don't make them feel they have to flag out their background to grab your attention. Reach out, listening, be patient. Being together somehow let us forget how different we are, and that is beautiful. They might be shy, but they have so much to offer, and don't let it slip away. So thank you so much for all the panelists and for all the listeners with us. And yeah, we have a wonderful program for the rest of the festival, and stay with us and we'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye, guys. Amazing. Okay. Sorry, just let me, because I don't know how to turn off the live stream. Anywho, let's just off. And then thank you again so much for being here. And I'll contact to you soon.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you. That's really.
Thank you,
everyone.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too. Bye.